Come here. Give me a hug. Come here.
For a hug? Hey, you okay?
I would just ask that you take care of me. Because, if Dad didn't need me right now, I don't exactly know what I would be for.
You want to talk some more?
I really can't.
There's a specific look that Kendall Roy gets when he's about to lose. It's not the look of a businessman who just miscalculated a merger, and it's not even the look of a man who's lost millions of dollars. It's deeper than that. It's the look of a 7-year-old boy realizing that the big gift he was promised for his birthday was actually just an empty box. We've all watched Succession. We've cringed through the rap performances, we've watched the boardroom bloodbaths, and we've seen the infinite loops of betrayal. But the most fascinating thing about the show isn't the wealth or the corporate warfare. It's the slow-motion demolition of Kendall Roy's soul. Kendall is a man who was built, piece by piece, to be a king. But the problem with building a man to be a king is that you often forget to build the man part first. By the time the series reaches its freezing, silent conclusion at the edge of the Hudson River, Kendall isn't a person anymore. He's a collection of expensive habits, corporate buzzwords, and unhealed traumas, all wrapped in a Loro Piana coat. How did we get here? How did a show that started as a witty satire about the 1% turn into a high-stakes Shakespearean tragedy about the performance of power? Today, we're looking at the man who would be king and the father who made sure he never could be. This is the post-mortem of a #1 boy. Chapter 1: The Heir with the Flair. If you want to understand Kendall Roy, you have to look at his headphones. In the very first scene of the series, we see Kendall in the back of a town car, eyes closed, violently nodding his head to the Beastie Boys. He's psyching himself up. He's getting into character. This is our first clue into the fundamental truth of Kendall. He is a man who is perpetually performing. Kendall doesn't just do business, he performs the idea of being a high-level corporate disruptor. He wears the uniform, the $600 sneakers, the Lanvin hoodies, the perfectly tailored power suits, but it always feels like he's playing dress-up. He's constantly searching for the vibe of power because he doesn't actually possess the substance of it. Think about the way he talks. He doesn't speak English, he speaks visionary billionaire. He wants to circuit break the narrative. He wants to talk about synergy and cross-platform optimization. He's a guy who reads Forbes the way a middle schooler reads a comic book, looking for a superhero to emulate. He wants to be the heir with the flair. He wants to be the guy who walks into a room and makes everyone else feel like they're standing in his shadow. But the tragedy of Kendall's performance is that it's deeply, painfully cringe. Whether it's the infamous L to the OG rap, which is arguably the most difficult to watch minute of television in history, or his attempts to be woke and relevant during his short-lived rebellion in Season 3, Kendall is always trying on a new personality to see if it makes him feel whole. The performance of power is a defense mechanism. If Kendall can look like a CEO, talk like a tech mogul, and walk like a killer, maybe he can hide the fact that he is actually just a hollow space where a person should be. He is the personification of fake it till you make it, except he's been faking it for 40 years, and the making it part is always just one betrayal away. The performance is a prison because he's so busy trying to be the version of himself that Logan would respect, he never gets around to being a person that he respects. He is a masterpiece of artifice, a man built out of brand names and board meetings. desperately hoping that if he performs power well enough, someone, anyone, will finally tell him he's enough. Chapter 2. The Candy Kitchen Promise. Everything that is wrong with Kendall Roy can be traced back to a single moment in a candy kitchen in Bridgehampton when he was 7 years old. In the series finale, we get the core memory that fueled Kendall's entire existence. Logan Roy looked at his 7-year-old son and promised him the empire. For most kids, that would be a fairy tale. For Kendall, it was a life sentence. Logan Roy didn't just give Kendall a goal, he gave him a destination, and then spent the next 33 years making sure the road was full of landmines. By promising him the company at such a young age, Logan effectively ended Kendall's development as an individual. From that moment on, Kendall wasn't a child or a student or a man, he was a successor in waiting. Imagine being 7 and having the entire weight of a multi-billion-dollar legacy placed on your shoulders. You don't explore hobbies, you don't develop a personality, you don't learn how to make friends who don't want something from you. You just wait. You wait for the king to die so you can finally begin your life. This is why Kendall is so broken. He has the emotional maturity of a prep school boy because he was never allowed to grow past the version of himself that Logan Roy hired back in Bridgehampton. His identity is entirely external. He is defined by a job title he doesn't have and a respect he can't earn. Logan Roy's parenting style was essentially a 40-year-long stress test. He would dote on Kendall, then humiliate him. He would call him the #1 boy, then tell him he wasn't a killer. He would dangle the crown in front of him just to see if Kendall would grab for it, and then slap his hand away when he did. The Candy Kitchen Promise was the original sin of the Roy family. It turned Kendall into a man who could only see his father as either a god to be worshipped or a monster to be slain. There was no middle ground. There was no room for a normal relationship. Kendall spent his entire life trying to be the man his father wanted him to be, only to realize that the man his father wanted him to be was someone who would eventually destroy his father. Logan Roy built Kendall to be a weapon, but he made the trigger too sensitive. He created a man who is addicted to his father's approval, a man who is literally incapable of existing without the shadow of the big dog looming over him. Kendall Roy is the result of a father who loved his company more than his kids, and a son who loved his father more than himself. Chapter 3. Complicated Airflow. If you listen closely to the way the Roys speak, you'll notice that they almost never say what they actually mean. Language in Succession isn't about communication, it's about complicated airflow. It's a tool for obfuscation, for bullying, and for performing a status that doesn't actually exist. And Kendall is the undisputed master of saying absolutely nothing with a lot of confidence. He uses jargon like a shield. When Kendall says, "Let's talk about the optics of the situation," he's not talking about how things look, he's trying to avoid talking about how things feel. By framing everything in corporate speak, Kendall can distance himself from the human reality of his actions. Whether it's the debt crisis in Season 1 or the no real person involved philosophy of the Cruises scandal, Kendall uses language to delete the humanity from the room. There's a reason he sounds like a walking LinkedIn post. If he uses the right words, high level, actionable, disruptive, pivot, he feels like he's in control. But it's a linguistic costume. It's the verbal equivalent of the suit he's wearing. If he stops using the buzzwords, he might have to use words like "I'm scared," "I'm lonely," or "I don't know what I'm doing." But the problem with complicated airflow is that it's fundamentally hollow. Because the language has no meaning, the relationships built on that language have no foundation. Think about Kendall's relationship with his siblings. They love each other, but they don't know how to say it. They express affection through insults and loyalty through betrayals. When Kendall tries to be authentic, it's even worse. He speaks in a kind of borrowed sincerity that he's clearly seen in TED Talks. He talks about the conversation and healing while simultaneously planning to gut a company or ruin a sibling. He's so used to the performance that he doesn't know how to turn it off. Even in his most vulnerable moments, he's searching for the right way to sound vulnerable. This linguistic hollowness is what makes Kendall so isolated. He's surrounded by people, but they're all just trading airflow. No one is actually listening because no one is actually saying anything. Kendall is a man screaming into a void, but because he's doing it in a $2,000 suit using the vocabulary of a McKinsey consultant, we almost don't notice that he's crying for help. The language of power has replaced the language of the soul, and when the music stops and the boardroom is empty, Kendall is left with a vocabulary that can describe a hostile takeover, but can't describe why he feels so incredibly, devastatingly empty.
You're my boy. You're my number one boy. I'm sorry. No.
Chapter 4: The Eye of the Storm. If Bridgehampton provides the complicated airflow, then Jeremy Strong's performance provides the atmospheric pressure. To watch Kendall Roy is to watch a man perpetually on the verge of an internal earthquake. Have you ever noticed how Kendall moves? It's rarely fluid. When he's trying to be the alpha, his posture is stiff, almost robotic, like he's wearing a suit of armor that doesn't quite fit. But when he's defeated, which is most of the time, he looks like he's physically shrinking. His shoulders cave in, his head drops, and he occupies the smallest possible amount of space in the room. But the real magic is in the eyes. Kendall's eyes are never still. They're constantly darting, scanning the room for approval, for threats, or for an exit. Even when he's delivering a confident pitch about the future of news, his eyes are telegraphing a desperate, panicking child. He's always checking to see if the performance of power is working. And then there's the water. If you look at the visual grammar of Succession, Kendall is haunted by water. It's everywhere. He's staring at the river in the pilot, he's submerged in a bathtub in Iceland, he's floating, face down in a pool in Italy, looking like a discarded toy. He's nearly drowning in a car at the end of season 1. Water in Kendall's story isn't just scenery, it's a symbol of his psychological state. He is a man who is perpetually underwater. He's drowning in his father's expectations, drowning in his own guilt, and drowning in a world that he wasn't built to survive. Every time we see him near water, he's at his most vulnerable, his most broken. It's the only place where the performance stops, because you can't act when you're fighting for air. Chapter 5: The Killer Paradox. Logan Roy famously told Kendall, "You're not a killer. You have to be a killer." This might be the most honest and the most devastating thing anyone ever said to him. Logan's definition of a killer is someone who can delete their own humanity to get what they want. Someone who can look at a person, a son, a partner, a waiter, and see only a tool or an obstacle. Logan was a killer. Matsson is a killer. Even Shiv and Roman try to be killers. But Kendall? Kendall is a man cursed with a conscience he doesn't want. This is the killer paradox. Kendall desperately wants to be a monster. He wants to have that cold, reptilian focus that his father had. He tries to prove he can do it. He guts Walter with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He betrays his father on national television. He plays the game of high-stakes corporate chicken. But every time he wins, he loses. every time he acts like a killer, it leaves a mark on his soul that he can't wash off. When he betrays Logan at the end of season 2, he doesn't look like a victor. He looks like a man who has just signed his own death warrant. His humanity is his greatest weakness in the Roy family business, but it's the only thing that makes him worth watching as a character. Chapter 6: No Real Person Involved. To understand the scale of Kendall's brokenness, we have to look at how he treats the world outside the Roy bubble. There's a phrase that haunts the second season of the show, NRPI, No Real Person Involved. It was a corporate code used to describe the victims of the cruise scandal, the people who didn't matter because they didn't have money or power. And while Kendall spent a lot of time acting like he was disgusted by that philosophy, the reality is that Kendall lives his entire life as if everyone is an NRPI. Think about the waiter at the end of season 1. To Logan, that boy's death was a problem to be solved. To Kendall, it was a tragedy, but a tragedy that he ultimately allowed his father to cover up so he could stay in the game. Kendall's guilt over that death is real, but it's also a performance. He uses his guilt to feel like he's a good person, even as he continues to benefit from the power that guilt should have made him renounce. Kendall treats the world like a set for his own internal movie. The woman he dates, the people he fires, the regular employees at Waystar, they aren't real people to him. They're audience members. They are there to validate his performance of power. When he fires the staff at Vaulter, he's not thinking about their mortgages. He's thinking about how disruptive and Logan-like he looks while doing it. Chapter 7: The Empty Crown. And so we arrive at the end. The final boardroom, the moment where the Candy Kitchen promise finally, mercifully expires. When the board votes against him, when Shiv, the person who knows him best, realizes she can't stomach him as the king, Kendall finally breaks. And for the first time in the entire series, the performance of power stops. He doesn't use corporate jargon, he doesn't nod to hip-hop, he doesn't talk about optics. He screams, "I am the eldest boy." It is the most honest thing he has ever said. It's not a business argument, it's a playground tantrum. It is the sound of a 40-year-old man finally admitting that his entire identity is based on a promise made to a 7-year-old. The loss of the company is, ironically, the only authentic thing to happen to Kendall Roy in his entire life. It is the moment the cage door finally opens. But the tragedy, the absolute soul-crushing tragedy, is that Kendall has been in the cage for so long that he doesn't know how to walk. The final shot of the series is Kendall sitting on a bench staring out at the Hudson River. His father's shadow, in the form of the ever-present Colin, is still hovering behind him. Kendall is finally free, but he has nothing to be free for. He has spent 40 years performing the role of the heir, and now that there is nothing to inherit, he is just a hollow space. Succession is a comedy, and it is. It's hilarious. But the story of Kendall Roy is a straight-up tragedy. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when we let our parents, our jobs, or our bank accounts tell us who we are. Logan Roy built a kingdom, but he used his children as the bricks, and Kendall, the #1 boy, was the cornerstone. He was built to be strong enough to hold up the weight of the empire, but flexible enough to never actually challenge the man who built it. In the end, Kendall Roy is a broken man, not because he lost the company, but because he never had a self to begin with. He performed power until the stage was dismantled, and then he found himself standing in the dark, wondering who he was supposed to be when the cameras weren't rolling. We watch Kendall Roy and we feel pity, and maybe a little bit of fear, because on some level, we're all performing. We're all using jargon to hide our insecurities, and we're all searching for validation from people who might not be capable of giving it. Kendall Roy didn't just lose the succession, he lost the chance to be a real person. And that is a loss that no amount of money, no corporate title, and no complicated airflow can ever fix. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the wreckage of the Roy family, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments, do you think Kendall Roy can ever be a real person, or was he dead the moment he left that candy kitchen in Bridgehampton? I'll see you in the next one.